Okay guys, we're going to go and do Uber Lilith on our Burn and Slash Fireborn. We've got a maximum life potion on, and we've got a maximum life incense on. The other one was just given to us by randoms. So we're going to go in, we're going to trigger her, and we're going to time our hunter to jump in just behind her, so it attacks her on spawn. If you manage to land it behind her, so it attacks her just as her HP comes up, you can go all in. You pretty much use all of your abilities at once. You want to spam Rake, and then you'll just absolutely destroy her. As you see, like stage 1's down, so now we're just going to wait for stage 2. And the second stage 2 is here. We're going to use Hunter to jump in. We're going to use Ravager, Armoured Hide, and Scourge all at the same time. You can use Vortex as well if you want. Just spam Rake, and then you'll see the health just decimate. And then beyond this point, honestly, it's just a matter of playing the mechanics. You need enough movement speed so you can outplay the mechanics, and then just use Armoured Hide and all of your defensive stuff, and get ready with potions just to try and avoid the floor here. So you just want to avoid the ghosts where possible, because they will hurt. You haven't got any combat here to generate your barrier. So we're just going to run around. You want to make sure you're not on this floor for too long, otherwise you're going to cause yourself problems trying to avoid the ghosts. But then you don't want to go on the other floor too early, otherwise the poison will destroy you. So now we're just going to rotate around here. Okay, I might have done this a bit funny. Okay, we're okay, just about. I actually managed to avoid the ghosts there somehow. It's quite an interesting rotation. It's not my normal one. But now we're just going to jump in and finish her off. And she actually nearly did me there, because you've got to be really careful. That new thing in the middle that comes up sometimes, that can apply a lot of poison. So get ready to use a potion. But as you can see, otherwise, it was pretty straightforward. Hi guys, so everyone's been playing Spiritborn this season, and everyone's been playing the Quill Volley and the Touch of Death builds, but I haven't seen too many people playing around with Jaguar builds too much recently, or at all. So I've gone upon myself to go and try and work out one that can do all the endgame content, and I'm pleased to be able to bring to you the Slash and Burn Fireborn, which goes all in on Rake. Before we crack on and look at all of these skills and gear and everything, I'd like to bring your attention to the Mobalytics build planner above. Please go and check this out. This has all of the information in there, including a starter variant, and it will include a final variant for farming, and it also includes a pit pushing variant. This is very important for the different types of playstyle that you're trying to do with it. I have done a pit 110 with this quite comfortably with about 8 minutes left. It can absolutely push further, so look for that at the end of the video. Also guys, if you liked the video and would like to see more content in the future, please like and subscribe to the video, and leave a comment down below. I'm always happy to hear your feedback and your comments on the build. And now let's get into the juicy stuff. Okay guys, let's do a quick rundown of the skill tree here. So we've got 1 point in Thrash, 2nd point in Enhanced Thrash. We just need these to get down to our core skills. We're then going all in on Rake with 5 points, and then we're taking Enhanced Rake, and then you take Advantageous Rake, which gives us more active cooldowns every time we hit at least one enemy with Rake. This is insane for reducing our cooldowns. While leveling, you can use Rake to level. I would highly advise giving Rampant Rake a point here, because this reduces the vigor per stack of Ferocity you've got. Rake allows you to stack Ferocity very quickly. This will allow you to level up without too much resource trouble. This will all be in the build planner as part of the starter variants, leveling variants, so be sure to check that out guys. Carrying on, we've got 1 point in Vigorous, and we've got 3 points in Balanced Exertion. We're changing this skill into a basic skill that doesn't cost resource, so Balanced Exertion just ends up giving us free damage without the detriment, so that's awesome. And Vigorous just gives us a little bit of extra resource generation. Because we've converted Rake into also being a basic skill, we've got 3 ranks in Follow Through as well, which just gives us more damage overall. Going down to the focus skills tree, we've got 1 point in Vortex, 1 point in Enhanced Vortex for a bit of extra damage after using Vortex. This is just an extremely good skill for grouping up enemies. We've got 1 point in Ravager, 1 point in Enhanced Ravager, and 1 point in Measured Ravager. This just allows us to have almost permanent uptime of Ravager, allowing us to dash to enemies permanently, giving us a minimum velocity of 2, and it also means that we can get 30% resource generation whilst it's active. So it's just extremely good all round for mobility and for extra damage. And then as for the other passives, we've got 1 point in Mirage, mainly just so we can put 3 points in Unrestrained Power. We have limited options in the passives tree here as considering we're going all in on Jaguars, the primary and the secondary spirit. So we just take all damage multipliers we can everywhere. So we've also taken 1 point in Focal Point, just so that we can put 3 points in Apex. We're making all enemies vulnerable to time, so we just want this so we get our extra 9% or doubled up on Elite's damage to 18% multiplicative damage against vulnerable enemies. And I've got 1 point in Diminishment here. There is a world later on with fully optimized gear where you can possibly move some points back into here later, but you don't really need it, to be honest. You're really tanky anyway. Coming down to the defensive tree, there's 5 points in Armoured Hide here because you just want the 2 passive resolve gain, and also it just reduces the cooldown of Armoured Hide. We've got 1 point in Enhanced Armoured Hide here. This allows us to reset our resolve every time we use it, and it also means that our we have a bit of Thorns in there, although that's kind of negligible at the moment on this build. We've got 1 point in Counterattack. We've got 1 point in Counterattack Enhancement, which reduces the cooldown of counterattack per stack of Frosty. This isn't that useful to us in this build, but what is extremely useful to us is Reinforced Counterattack, which multiplies our critical strike damage for every close enemy up to 30% multiplicative. We don't have this on our hotbar, but this is baked into our build through the Ring of Midnight Sun, and we get it for free, so we would absolutely take this for the extra damage, and on top of that it gives us a bit of extra dodge chance as well, which is always nice. We've got 1 point in Scourge, 1 point in Enhanced Scourge, and then 1 point in Adaptable Scourge. This is to give us some crowd control ability, so slow and fear every time it hits. When it stacks up to 50 stacks for 6 seconds, you do 50% multiplicative damage to crowd controlled enemies. This is really, really powerful. And then we've also taken Adaptable Scourge just because that gives us pretty much permanent uptime on lifesteal, which is very, very nice for our builds where we don't have that much lifesteal elsewhere. I've currently got 3 points in Anti-Venom to help cap my poison resistance. There is a world later on where you would not necessarily need all 3 of these. You may even be able to get away with just 1, but you definitely would be able to get 1 point out of here if you wanted to put anywhere else you'd like. You could put that in Impatient Guard, or you could put it in Diminishment. But for now, I need these to get my poison resistance up high enough so that I'm not just getting absolutely slammed by poison. Okay, so moving on to the potency skills, we don't actually take much in this tree. We're pretty much just taking all of the multipliers that are useful to us. Because we're casting Armoured Hide at a reasonable rate, we take Resilient, which will mean we'll get a 15% multiplicative life every 10 seconds. No matter what key passive you take here, you should be pretty much casting Armoured Hide every 10 seconds anyway, so this is very nice, and you can scale this later on with Tempers if you choose to go that route. There is also 3 points in Potent and 3 points in Furnace. These both just multiply our Jaguar skill damage and critical damage per stack of Frosty. These are just very, very strong for Jaguar builds. And then coming down to the ultimate tree, we're taking the Hunter with 1 point, because we don't really need 5 points in here. And we're taking 1 point in Harmonious Hunter, which gives us 100% multiplicative damage to injured enemies to us, and it overfills your Ferocity by 4 stacks every time you use it, so that gives you another 20% attack speed and attack speed cap 2. And then we've got 1 point in Exalted Hunter, which allows us to reset Hunter multiple times before we have to have the cooldown come off. And because the cooldown is only 14.53 seconds here, and it goes down a tiny bit once all your skills start kicking in, you pretty much have almost permanent uptime of Hunter on this build. If you use Prodigy's Tempo key passive, you can have permanent uptime of this as fast as you can humanly cast it. It's pretty insane. But as we'll go into in a minute, you can choose one of 2 different key passives here. In terms of the passives, we've got 3 in Resolution for extra damage when we cast an ultimate skill and doubled against elites. So this is very powerful for burst damage after using the Hunter, especially if you can cast it time after time again. And then we got 3 points of Spiritual Attunement for more Vigor, which just scales our Rod of Kepeleki damage. We've got 3 points of Supremacy, which scales our damage based on enemies killed with whilst an ultimate is active, and also when an ultimate ends. So it's just multiplicative damage for our build. And then for our final node for our key passive, I would highly recommend for farming, just speed farming, nothing on pit pushing level, using Prodigy's Tempo, because to be honest, although this doesn't give you the most damage, this will give you permanent uptime of all your cooldowns no matter what you do, and it gives you enough damage that you can just fly around the map and destroy everything using Hunter to get around super fast, and you'll never worry. But in terms of pit pushing, on this build, adaptive stances is absolutely stronger, and there's two reasons for this. One, because you're playing a Jaguar build, it gives you 30% attack speed. This goes into attack speed cap 1. This is the only way that actually makes it very easy to get to 100% attack speed on this build without having to suffer the loyalties mantle, which we'll go into later as to why that's so important for damage. And secondly, there is the 50% to core stats, because you will be casting other class skills enough that you'll be permanently up with 50% more dexterity. 50% extra dexterity is enormous, and the more of that you can stack, the more bonus damage you're getting for free there. It really is significantly, significant. When I used Prodigy's Tempo and a Pit 110 on my current setup, the damage was pretty slow. When I changed to adaptive stances, I absolutely obliterated them. So this is what I would recommend for pit pushing. I haven't tried Vital Strikes. Maybe that would work too. But for now, adaptive stances is probably the strongest option here. In terms of the Paragon boards, we'll try and get through this quickly. So on the starter board, we've taken Spirit right now. This is for the crit damage baked in for all three. You've got 2 multipliers and the additive crit damage. It's extremely strong. This can go in any board, in any slot, where you can get a whole bucket ton of dexterity, which you can in this starter board very easily. As you can see, I haven't got enough Paragon points right now to max them out, but on a full 300 Paragon board, I would take pretty much all the dexterity here and max this one out. Beyond this, we go up here into the Vicious Shield board. We take Vicious Shield for the Legendary node. This is extremely bugged right now. It's only meant to be able to give you a 33% multiplicative damage based on your barrier being 100% of your maximum life. But at the moment, it's scaling off of your base life. So depending on how many multiples of your base life your maximum life ends up being, and I think the base life's about 500 to 600 at level 60, you will end up multiplying that 33% multiplicative damage many times over. So this is extremely powerful. You just want to stack max HP everywhere whilst this is still working this way. As for the glyph, we've taken Canny, which is scaling your non-physical damage. It gives you a multiplicative non-physical damage bonus, and it gives you an extra non-physical multiplicative bonus on the legendary stat. So this is just extremely powerful for damage all round. And on a full 300 Paragon board, we would take all of the Paragon nodes, all of the intelligence nodes. And then we've taken most of the clusters here. We don't take the damage while you have barrier ones, because frankly that's pretty negligible in the grand scheme of things. But we want all the barrier generation. We take the lightning resistance to help us cap resistances. We want to take all of the barrier generation down here and the crit damage. We want to take all of the damage reduction while in barriers and the vulnerable damage, and we want to take all the armor and the max life here. Moving on, the next board will be the sapping board. So we come straight in, we work towards the glyph. We've taken Menagerist in here because this gives us a bonus to all of our magic nodes, but more importantly, we get 3 out of 4 of our spirits on this build, so that's a 12% multiplicative damage there. I haven't worked out a way to get the extra 4% baked in consistently yet, so if I do, I will. The incarnate skill damage here only really scales our Ravager, but that's okay because Ravager ends up scaling into our build with all of the Jaguar and Fire bonuses anyway, so that does actually give us quite a bit of extra damage baked in. And on top of that, this scales our maximum resource from our magic nodes. And here I've taken 1 intelligence node and I've taken both strength nodes right now. This allows me to get enough stats so that I can unlock all my rare nodes later on. But you can take these out if you don't need them when you get to Paragon 300. But they're quite useful for leveling up. And you could shift these into the damage ones down here instead, for example. Moving on, we just take pretty much all the clusters, and I've only missed out nodes right now because I don't have enough Paragons, but you pretty much want everything except maybe one of these dodge chance nodes because you don't overly need that. Moving on, we go upwards to the Convergence board. This is just very powerful for all builds because we're always going to cap this, especially with taking non-physical damage. So we come straight into the glyph. I've used the Wildfire glyph here. I figured since we're using a fire build, we should probably use this. It's got the additive and the multiplicative fire damage based on the legendary bonus and the standard bonus. The additional bonus is quite an interesting one here. It doesn't give us direct damage, but because it gives us another form of reducing all our active cooldowns by lucky hit chance, and we're hitting up to 4 times every attack if you've got a really good roll on double hit with core attacks on your Rod of Kepelecki, you can end up hitting and lucky hitting so many times that your cooldowns just keep churning down, on top of the fact that Rake also churns your cooldowns down. And if you've got Prodigy's Tempo on, these two mechanisms on top of Prodigy's Tempo will just mean your cooldowns are just off cooldown all the time, all of them. It's completely insane. But even if you don't have Prodigy's Tempo, Wildfire baked in with the Rake cooldown mechanism means that you've got enough cooldown reduction and enough cooldown reduction baked into the build anyway from Loyalty's Mantle, and you've got enough extra active cooldown reduction that you're going to get your cooldowns in a position where you can use your skills often enough that you're not too worried. And in an ideal world, you take as much dexterity here as possible. I haven't right now because I haven't got the nodes, but later on you would with a full 300 board. And then, yes, we obviously take the legendary node, as we say, and then in terms of the clusters, we just take as much as possible. It's possible in the end boards, you might not be able to take the end nodes here. You need to somehow suffer some nodes if you want to complete the glyphs. But for now, we've just taken pretty much all of the things, all of the nodes except a couple here and there. Moving on to the final board, we are using the Revealing board. I tried a few of the others, but this one just seems the most logical for raw damage in terms of the other nodes available. It has the most armor available. There is other boards you could potentially use if you can solve armor without the need for all the armor here. I would potentially take the board that has fire resistance in it as well if I could, but I haven't got to that point yet, so we'll see. Maybe the planner will update nearer that time. So coming into here, I am currently using the Headhunter glyph. This is to help cap up stats, but it also gives you the multiplicative damage to elites and the multiplicative damage just all round. There are some other glyphs you could use. The Colossal glyph would give you higher multiplicative damage based on your resolve stacks, but then the additive part does not count for anything at all. So overall, I think by maxing out all of the dexterity in here and other bits, it will help you cap out your stats here. But also it will give you a lot of bonus damage from the dexterity when at level 100. So we'll see. This is a glyph that seems to be working right now. This might change later on. And then we come up, we take the legendary node because this is very powerful against crowd controlled enemies and gives us another form against non-unstoppable monsters to knock them down, since we're making them vulnerable pretty much all the time. And then we're taking all of the attack speed, all of the resistances we can. On a full 300 board, we'd take the lightning resistance, the poison resistance, all the life and the armor nodes, and we'd just skip the dodge nodes here and maybe skip one lightning resistance and the couple of lucky hit nodes here. But otherwise, we just take most stuff here. We're not overly fussed about the crowd control and the vulnerable damage here, but if you can bake it in, then that is a nice bit of extra damage there. But taking the normal nodes are far more important. Okay, let's run down the gear quickly. So in the helm, we're using the Loyalty's Mantle. On this build, I tried the Harmony of Ibawaka. I tried the Shaco, the Harlequin's Crest. I tried the Andariel's Visage. And I have yet to try a legendary helm, but to be honest, it would have to be a really, really, really good 3GA helm with a very good aspect, with very good tempers to even consider beating out the primary hull damage here. But it is possible that a legendary node might be better. But for the basis of this build, the Loyalty's Mantle is what we're using here. Gives us all stats, movement speed, damage reduction, and velocity. The velocity is not that important to us, but the other three are very nice. But more importantly, you really want the highest aspects you can get here, because that gives you 60% cooldown reduction on your base spirit, which is on your Jaguar skills. And it also makes your bonuses on your Jaguar skills both 100% stronger. They both have to match, which is why both of my spirits are Jaguar, but when they are, they both get twice as strong. So that primary damage does 30% rather than 15. Very, very powerful indeed. Moving on to the chest piece, we've got dexterity, maximum life, armor. Ideally, you would get a Grace Graphics in armor here. I haven't, but if you do, that would help me solve armor and more, so I'd be able to start removing those in the Paragon board, or even consider starting to move the skull out of here, put another gem in, and that would help me in the end, solve my resistances, which, as you'll see in a bit, it's not completely capped. I've taken Rake Size here for one of the utility skills. That just makes your ability a bit bigger, so that makes it nice for farming. And then maximum resolve stacks. In an ideal world, you'll probably roll at least 2 masterworks in here, if not 3. You could masterwork once into armor to help you get to the point where you can remove your skull and solve your resistances. But you could just go all in on resolve stacks and accept that you're tanky enough anyway, because the resolve stacks will give you damage reduction and damage to go with it. And then we've taken, as the aspects, we've taken the interdiction aspects, because at the moment block chance is scaling above 100%. So the more resolve stacks we've got, the more block chance we're getting on top of the 100% from Armored Hide. And this just scales our damage like mental, because that plays into the next aspect, which is coming in on our gloves. Our gloves have got redirected force on it, which scales our critical strike damage based on our block chance. Now, at 100% block chance, this is meant to give you 58% multiplicative crit chance, and doubling that up if you block. But at the moment, as I said, you can scale your block chance beyond 100%. So if you scale your block chance to 200, 300, 400%, you will end up multiplying this crit damage by 2, 3, 4 times respectively. It is completely broken, but that is how it is at the moment. In terms of the stats on the gloves, I've got maximum life, attack speed, and rake. This allows, you really want attack speeds and maximum life on here alongside rake, because maximum life scales your damage with the viscous shield node, and attack speeds, it's pretty difficult to get your attack speed up high enough in attack speed 1 on this build with all the uniques on. Unless you take adaptive stances. But even so, having attack speed here is probably better than dexterity overall. If you find you don't need the attack speed, you can absolutely roll dexterity here instead. That would be absolutely fine. And then rake here as well, because that's our main skill, so we just want to scale up our core skills for it here. I would probably, in an ideal world, triple masterwork into rake here, but you could also triple masterwork into max life as well if you really wanted to abuse the viscous shield legendary node bug right now. And then for tempers, we've got barrier generation and overpower damage. Barrier generation, that just helps us scale up our barrier to 100% from our rune. And then overpower damage plays in because of how our mechanics work with our amulet later on, which we'll get into. For the pants, we're using currently the Tibalt's Will, and really you want, the only greater affix you really care about here is maximum resource. Obviously, if you can get one in max life as well and damage reduction, that's excellent, but maximum resource is very important here, and you'd ideally triple masterwork there, or you could triple masterwork into max life and abuse viscous shield as well, but maximum resource is a very second close contender there. And you want the best aspect you can here, 20% like I've got, or anywhere near to that, if you can. A bog standard Tibalt's Will do just fine. Just try and get one with a really decent aspects on it. Somewhere like 17, 18, 19, 20% would be fine. Moving on to the boots. We're using a legendary boots with the duelist aspects on. This gives us 4 more veracity stacks, more than we would usually get. 5 if you get the ancestral version, which I have not got right now. That gives us more critical damage. It gives us more attack speed when we're fighting. So it's just very powerful. And for the stats, we've got dexterity, maximum life, and movement speed. So I've got 2 GAs here. It's probably the best legendary item I've dropped for my build. You'd ideally get the greater affix in movement speed, because that helps you move between combat faster for a speed farm build, and helps you on things like Uber Lilith. And then for the tempers, we've taken barrier generation and movement speed again, because we just want more movement speed. And as we said before, barrier generation helps us generate up to 100% of our maximum life as barrier. The implicit here, I've got evade grants extra movement speed. Really, I always prefer the maximum evade charges. I just find that more useful when you're in a situation close up with the boss and you've got to evade the mechanics, such as at the end of a pit where there's shadow mechanics. But you can take whichever one you prefer here, honestly. All 3 will be fine, just really depends on preference. So moving on to the weapon, we're using, as lots of builds are right now, the Rod of Kepeleki. Now, as my build goes, this is a very extremely broken item I've got right here. It was gifted to me, I was very lucky. It's a 4GA with almost max aspect, so you do not need a weapon this good for this build to work like it is in the video. You really just want to try and find one that's got as close to 3% on the aspects as possible. That really is the most important thing. And then if you can, get one with a greater affix or maximum resource, and if you're really lucky, try and get it so you've got the chance for core skills to hit twice as well. They fixed that in the recent patch, so that's why I've changed it around, so it's now got 2 hits in chance for core skills to hit twice. I'd ideally have gone 3 times in there, I think, because that just means I'm attacking more often, which means I'm hitting more often, which means I'm getting the Jaguar primary more often. The maximum resource will scale your critical strike damage, but overall you just want to hit more. So yeah, don't be turned off by how good this weapon looks. You can get by with a totally basic one if you want. Just make sure that aspect is as high to 3% as possible. Moving on to the amulet, we're using the Banished Lord's Talisman. I actually have a far better one of these sitting in my inventory, but I've chosen to use a slightly worse one to prove that it was good. So you would ideally get greater affixes in maximum life and attack speed here more than anything. Core skills is nice and overpower as well, but the attack speed and the maximum life really scale your damage and help you get around quicker in speed farm. And most importantly on this item, you really want as close to 60% in your aspect as you possibly can, because that's really where the damage comes from. You're basically going to be overpowering every single attack here, which means that you're going to be getting a 60% multiplicative damage on your overpower, on your critical strikes that overpower, and every time you overpower because you're using your Roderick Epileki, you're critical striking. So you're going to end up getting huge damage here, 50% bonus when you overpower, plus another 52 or 60% if you get maximum when you crit strike. It's just huge. It's like a 300% damage multiplier straight out the bucket, on top of the stats being very, very good for this build as well. Rings wise, legendary ring, we've got the Ivory of Wild Claws on. This is where some of the magic happens. It allows every time you cast Rake for a Spirit Jaguar to come out, and it also casts Rake at a random enemy, dealing up to 65% of the base damage. Now this would have been lovely if we could have got it on a two-handed weapon or amulet, but obviously we don't have those slots available, so the ring will have to do. But really this is important because this helps stack up those hits to cast the Jaguar primary more often, and this has its own role with the core skills attacks twice here. I've tested it. If you attack and only attack once, there is a chance this can also attack twice anyway, so it rolls its own roll. So that's very, very useful, and that's why you see fire all over the screen on top of your own attacks, because they're just going around attacking things around the screen for you. It really makes speed farming very easy. In terms of stats, you've got Dexterity, Maximum Life, and Lucky Vulnerable. That Lucky Vulnerable could change, but if you took that off, you would need to take Vortex out the build and put Saw on the build with the Vulnerable node. So I prefer to put Vulnerable here because it gives you a much more consistent way of making enemies vulnerable, which is a damage multiplier on its own without any additive vulnerable damage. And it also allows you to apply other status effects and such if you have them baked into your build. And then for tempers, we've taken resource generation and critical strike damage. You could absolutely take resource reduction here. Apparently this reduces the amount of spirit you need before you can permacast your overpower. But if you get enough resource on your builds, you don't necessarily need that, and resource generation just helps you generate your resource back to max anyway. And probably, to be honest, we would probably change critical strike damage here for overpower damage in an ideal world. I don't think I've got any temper rolls left on this ring, and I haven't got a better one right now. But if I did, overpower damage would definitely be better because it would scale slightly higher. So keep an eye out for that. The implicit for fire resistance is pretty useful here, but if we rolled a board with fire resistance, you would want to change this for cold or shadow, or poison. That would help you scale. That would help you cap the other three that you would struggle to cap here otherwise. And our final item is the Ring of Midnight Sun. You just want the highest aspect here possible. I got extremely lucky at the end of my season rewards, and it gave me this ring, a greater affix cooldown with a 50% aspects on it, which I couldn't believe. So that's what I'm using here. And then masterworking wise, you probably just want to go all in on cooldown reduction, but you absolutely could go all in on dexterity or crit damage as well if you fancy, because to be honest, you have so much cooldown reduction in this build anyway. So whatever you fancy or whatever you feel is best. In terms of gems and runes, for the armors, we're taking amethysts because this gives us more barrier generation. This plays into getting our barrier to 100%, which is very, very powerful with the viscous shield node. In terms of runes, just like most other builds right now in the Spiritborn arsenal, we are using Pock and Q in our pants here. That's for every time we spend 300% of our maximum resource, we gain the Earthen Bulwark barrier, which has just been buffed as well since the recent patch. And we're spending 100% of our resource every time we're at capped resource, so we're going to be doing this very, very quickly. And then in our weapon, we are using the Zol and Zao runes. This means every time we invoke a skill from another class, we gain 20% of, we gain 150 offering, which activates, and we have to activate that twice, so that gives us 20% maximum life for 6 seconds. We are reasonably going to end up casting Bulwark twice to cast this maximum life within 6 seconds at the rate we're attacking. And that maximum life gives us more defense, but it also scales our damage right now from Viscous Shield with the bug that's going on. So these are very powerful indeed. There are other options you can use, but right now this setup seems to be the meta build. And in terms of our gems and our jewellery, at the moment I have got a skull in my amulet, and I've got a amethyst and a sapphire in my rings. This is because cold and shadow resistance are the two most difficult resistances to cap for Spiritborn. And then at the moment I just need a skull in there to cap my armour. But as I've said before in the gear section, if I had a greater affix in armour here and maybe one masterwork here, then you would easily be able to take the skull out and put a diamond in for all resistance, or a single resistance if you felt you could cap two other resistances otherwise in your tree. And that's the route I would go. As for spirits, because we're using the Loyalties Mantle, we are taking Jaguar in both the primary and the secondary. So this is a true, pure Jaguar build. This is actually very, very powerful if used with this build. The primary damage here is normally every 15th time you deal direct damage to an enemy, you deal an additional 30% of the damage you have dealt to them in the last half a second. Now, normally that's 15%. The Loyalties Mantle has doubled that to 30%. So that's already 100% multiplicative damage to what is our main damage dealer anyway. This is the main damage dealer in this build, not Rake. This primary here is taking all of the damage you're doing to that enemy and then piling it all into one big node of damage at the end. And it seems to multiply it to a point where you do billions and billions of damage. And because you're attacking potentially twice yourself each time, and then you've got a Jaguar Spirit that attacks and also can attack twice each time, you're potentially hitting 4 times all the time. And then if you're hitting groups of enemies, you can stack this 15th attack up very, very quickly indeed. So this will, this activates extremely quickly on this build. And then the secondary you just use because it makes sense anyway. It gives you an extra stack of ferocity, more fire, that gives you more attack speed, and to be honest, this just makes it so you're never going to run out of ferocity no matter what you do. But more importantly, if you're using the mantles, the mantle's loyalty, the loyalty mantle, you absolutely need to be taking both of these. For Mercenaries, we're taking Rahir as our primary, and we're taking Variana as our secondary. So we're taking Rahir as our primary because he gives us a means of crowd control, damage reduction, and a means of multiplying our damage. So he's just a very, very powerful primary mercenary when you're playing solo. You can either choose to go fully down the left-hand side, take the Rahir grants you 15% armor. This will help you cap your armor in solo. Once you get to the point where you've solved armor, if you get to that point, you can go down the left-hand side of the right-hand side of the tree here, and that gives you 15% to all resistances, helping you solve resistances. Both sides at the end have multiplicative damage based on their skills. The left-hand side probably gives you that 15% multiplicative damage more consistently because that plays into both of his skills here. The second one here gives you 15% and 25% respectively, and those are based off of whichever skill is active at the time. But more importantly, he just helps you solve your armor or your resistances, which is very, very useful in the end game when you're trying to min-max your damage more than anything because the enemy's HPs are scaling so much. In terms of the secondary, we're using Variana, as we said, and the reason for this is because Bloodthirst is very, very good for giving you bonus attack speed. This gives us 10% extra attack speed even when we're playing in teams. When she uses Bloodthirst. So the attack speed on this build is just very, very strong. The faster you attack, the more you're casting. You attack 2 to 4 times, and that just plays into the Jaguar primary and the Spirit Hall. So yes, we're also having this activate when the player casts any skill in combat to make sure when you're in combat, it's just going to cast on you as much as humanly possible. So that's my recommendation. You could absolutely use any other you fancy here in either slot. This is just the setup that I like, and this works pretty well. In terms of leveling, whilst you're trying to find these uniques, if you haven't got them available, you can absolutely just use legendaries across the board. It is obviously going to work a hell of a lot better. The two most important pieces of gear here are the Rod of Kapaleki and the Ring of Midnight Sun. If you get those two, this build will start to function very well. If you can also get a Loyalties Mantle, that will make it function extremely better with the spirits. But whilst you're leveling, you can go with just legendaries, put in any useful aspects you can, ideally duelists for attack speed, And you can use Rake on this build to level up if you like, because if you look in the skill tree here, and we open this up, as I mentioned before, when you're leveling up, you've got a node here you can take called Rampant Rake. That reduces the vigor cost by 2 for every stack of Ferocity. If you've got the duelist aspect on, you get at least 8 stacks of Ferocity with a good one. So worst case scenario, you've just got your basic 4 stacks of Ferocity, so that reduces the cost of Rake by 8. The more stacks of Ferocity you've got, the better. A Hunter also allows you to overcap your Ferocity by 4 every time you use it, so that can give you another bunch of resource reduction. And then honestly, you would just look for a legendary staff which has got resource cost reduction on it probably, and just make do with what you've got until you can farm these items. You can farm all of these items at bosses. The tables are available on the internet. I can link these in the description if people would like. The Banished Lords is just a nice addition. The build did pretty good damage without it. This just takes it to another level. You can use any useful damage amulet before this, even with max life, that scales your damage too. And then for pants, as I said, you can just use a legendary pants here. If you're lucky enough to get a Tybalt's Will, you can use this as well. So you do not need most of this gear for this build to level 1, but once you do get it, the build really starts to come together. Okay guys, we're going to go and do a T4 Duriel. We've got our maximum life potion on, and we've got a couple of essences on to increase some resistances and our max life again. So we're going to go and spawn up our T4 Duriel here. Just going to wait for him to spawn. We'll stand up here because he generally fires his baskets out forwards. In the second he's about to spawn, we're going to pounce on him with Hunter from behind. And then we're just going to go all in, and he should just melt. And there you go. There is a T4 Tormented Duriel. Okay, so we're going to be doing a pit 110 on our Burner/Fireborn. For the purposes of this test, we've actually changed our key passive, because for pushing on this build, you get a lot more damage if you're using adaptive stances instead of Prodigy's Tempo. Prodigy's Tempo is very, very good for cooldown reduction, but we've got a pretty decent amount of that on this build anyway. By using adaptive stances, we not only gain 30% more attack speed, so that helps us almost cap our attack speeds out. It also gives us 50% core stat, and that really does make a big difference to damage here. I would recommend using Prodigy's Tempo for just general farming, because it pretty much gives you permanent uptime on all of your cooldowns all of the time. But for raw damage and pit pushing, using adaptive stances is absolutely the way to go. It is pretty significantly better in terms of damage. It just means that occasionally your unstoppable may not be up, so you have to be careful of crowd control, so you can't just face roll every single crowd control effect on the floor. But the damage is not too bad. My gear is by no means perfect. It's definitely not perfectly masterworked. And I've still got quite a few Paragon points to get. I think my top glyph is level 90, but most of them are 81 right now, so there's still a bit of power to gain there too. And it's possible that maybe some of the other glyphs will end up being better overall, but the ones I've got seem to be working pretty well. I think if you can do a pit 110 on any build right now, you can pretty much clear any of the standard endgame content, and it's just a matter of how far you can push in the pit beyond this point. So if we get this shrine, we will now be at 200% attack speed, caps and attack speed cap 1, and caps and attack speed cap 2, and it's absolutely insane. You attack like an absolute madman, pretty much just clearing the screen on demand. And as we can stack more dexterity later on, we'll just scale the damage even more, because you get 50% extra core stat. So it's going to scale by your core stat, raw core stat. So we just need to come around here. Got some good old backtracking going on. So we're just going to look for the elite packs where we can. And we really want to try and angle the skill where the big explosion on the end is going to hit the main enemies, because that is where the big damage comes from. You've got 2 hits on Rake. You've got one hit that hits initially, and then you've got a second one which is explosive. And then on top of that, you've also got your Jaguar from your Jaguar Spirit from your aspect, which is coming out and attacking. And all while that, I'm currently running about 86% chance for double core skills to hit. And that has a separate role for the Jaguar Spirit as well. So that means that you can end up getting 4 hits here. 2 of them are about 60% effectiveness, and 2 of them at full effectiveness. And it means you can do some pretty nutty numbers. I'm doing hundreds of billions of damage here, so I'm not quite hit trillions on this build. But I'm certainly, considering how fast I'm attacking and how much AoE there is, the fact that I'm hitting for hundreds of billions is pretty decent here. So there we go, that was an instance where for a brief moment, I just didn't quite have my unstoppable up permanently, but I pretty much had it off cooldown straight afterwards, so we're okay. It does mean you can't spam Hunter quite as much, but Hunter's got a 13-second cooldown on it anyway, so once you take into account the animation cooldown, you pretty much only have to wait a few seconds, but worst case scenario before you can use it again anyway. And you've got 2 other means of cooldown reduction based into this, and you've got the Hunter cooldown reset on the node as well, so Hunter's going to be off cooldown very, very quickly most of the time. And as you can see, once you get going, the damage in this build is pretty decent. So we're going to come around here. Be careful of those lightning spears on the floor, because they do actually do quite a lot of damage now. For some reason they added some form of dot damage to them, which is nasty. Okay, so we're going to come down here. I guess we'll try to check the channeling shrine, will just be completely nutty. The channeling shrine basically doubles your Rod of Kepaleki damage for some reason or another. Probably something to do with the fact it gives you more max resource or such under the bonnet. But either way, as you can see, we just absolutely shred when we've got... That was a 452 billion hit there. Okay, where's the next pack of elites? Here they are. Maybe we can get those down before the shrine ends as well. Nope, not quite, but we got a couple of them down. Okay, so that's them down. And pretty much, guys, the rotation here is you pretty much run, you jump in, you engage with Hunter, and then you use Vortex to group the enemies. You use Armoured Hide to make sure that you've got Unstoppable and you block up, and then you use Scourge to crowd control the enemies, which will go around and constantly hit all the enemies around you to get up to 50 stacks of crowd controlled damage, because it slows and fears all enemies around you. And you use Ravager just to give yourself some extra resource regeneration and to allow you to dash between enemies where needed. You can pretty much just use all of those abilities all at once. Vortex is kind of on demand, and then the Hunter you just use whenever you can in combat, because the more hits of that, the more you cast that, the quicker you can get your supremacy and your other ultimate damage scalers up. And also, to be honest, Hunter as an ultimate does do quite a lot of damage itself as well. Okay, so we're shredding the boss down at a reasonable pace here. He should be done in an okay speed here. So I do generally play the shadow mechanics and don't just try and face tank them. I probably could face tank them for a while, but you know, it's better to be safer than sorry, really. For some reason I got 2 pretty much close back to back there, so that's not ideal. But you can just use, I like to just outplay them and then just jump back in with Hunter. But we've got another one pretty much straight away. But we can wait for him to do his thing, wait for that, and you can just go, you can either use Ravager or Hunter to engage. It's a bit of a shame that came up while he was staggered, but never mind, we've still got plenty of time left. Okay. Oh, he didn't hit me. Just about avoided that one. So as you can see, we're also extremely tanky. We're pretty much at armor cap here. And if we can get an armor GA on our chest piece, which I do not have right now, I'd be able to take some armor out of other places and replace it with resistances, and that would help solve resistances. And I think I'm just going to go for it here, because there we go. And there you go, guys. That's a Pit 110 on the Burn and Slash build. We've done it with about 7 to 8 minutes left in time, so there's plenty of time left. This build could absolutely go to Pit 115, 120 if I had better gear.